It's the 1980s in South Florida. Cocaine is rampant, murders are at an all-time high, the Mariel boatlift has just happened, and there's tens of thousands of Cuban refugees arriving on Miami's shores on a daily basis. It's chaos. Can you imagine what it was like to be an investigative newspaper reporter during that era? And why do we care about that on Nothing But the Truth? Well, because reporters share a lot of the same skill sets and techniques and interests as we investigators do, and you're going to find out why when we hear from a Pulitzer-Prize winning reporter who was right in the thick of it during Miami's heyday of the cocaine cowboys and all the other madness. Don't go away. You want to hear this.
Welcome to Nothing But the Truth, the podcast about investigations and how you can become a better detective. This is the no BS, no Hollywood nonsense real deal. Now here's your host, Detective Rom.
Hey again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Nothing But the Truth, the podcast that helps your investigations get better by helping you become a better investigator. I'm Ramesh Nyberg, Detective Rom, your host, and I'm so glad you're with me again. It's another interesting show and a lot of useful information I hope will help you in your career or whatever endeavors you're involved with in the investigative world. It's another beautiful weekend coming up here in South Florida. We're about to dodge a tropical storm or some big mess that's going to cause a ton of rain over the weekend. So, just in time for Saturday and Sunday. But such is life here in South Florida. And speaking of which, life in South Florida, man, have we got some interesting stuff to bring your way today about what life was like in the 1980s in South Florida. It was quite different in the investigative world and the crime world, and I hope that you'll enjoy today's interview. First, let me give you my contact information for questions, comments, feedback. You can always get me at truth@nybergpi.com. That's truth, like nothing but the truth, at nybergpi.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Nothing But the Truth. There's a group there that I hope you'll join. And you can always, of course, become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Detective Rom. Learn all about how you can support the show. I had a chance recently to sit down with an old friend who I met back in the 1980s as a result of mutual interest in some homicide cases. And I'm not going to delay this any longer. Here we go. And my guest today is a guy who spent a lot of time as a reporter in South Florida. This was during a time of incredible crime, the influx of the Colombian cartels, and just basically a time of chaos in South Florida. There was the Mariel boatlift, and he's going to tell you what that was like from a reporter standpoint. And I think you're going to see a lot of similarities between a crime reporter and an investigator. Jon O'Neill joins us now on Nothing But the Truth. Jon was a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times, the Miami Herald, and the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. He also has done video productions and has been a writer for a production company in L.A. Some of his work has been on the Discovery Channel, A&E, and National Geographic. He actually won a Pulitzer Prize in 1982 for covering Hurricane Andrew, and he also got an Emmy for a Nat Geo wild show called Future Cat. Jon O'Neill is here. Jon, welcome to Nothing But the Truth. Thanks a lot for being here, and how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. And can I just say that I was part of a team that won a Pulitzer and part of a team that won an Emmy. Because without the people that I worked with, none of those things would have happened. But I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to share this time with you. We've kind of been through a lot together, you and I. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. Yeah, we have been through a lot, and we'll talk about that too, how we met and the case that we met. That might be a topic for just an episode all by itself, right? Is the Harry Rivenbark case, which we'll get into a little bit. But yeah, working on teams. I mean, yes, your humility is well noted, but you did some great work, and I know what it's all about to work on teams, because that's the way we worked in Homicide too. Nobody solved a case all by themselves. But anyway, tell me a little bit about how you got into being a reporter, first of all.
Well, I was actually, for the first part of the 1980s, I was actually in the airline industry in Miami, which was had its own craziness attached to it. But airlines kept going bankrupt, so I wanted to try to do something that was just as interesting and a little more stable. And I sort of stumbled into it, and I got a couple of very, very lucky breaks from some people who were obviously had my best interest at heart. And within a year or so of starting, I was a police reporter, and I knew nothing about police other than when I was a younger person, I would run from them sometimes. So I had a huge learning curve to start with, and there was so much going on. It was kind of an overwhelming experience. But thanks to detectives such as yourself, who took the time to explain things to me and show me how things worked, I was able to get a very good foundation for being able to cover the craziness that was going on, and hopefully do it justice. And my main goal when I was a reporter, police reporter, was to sort of give people an idea of what life was like for you guys, with massive amounts of homicides day after day after day. I wanted to try to give people a look at what your lives were like, because you were out there working every single day, and that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting viewpoint, because I remember very well dealing with you during those days. And some people may not be familiar with the way it worked, but you guys literally would call up the homicide office and ask to speak with a detective, because you heard a certain case go out, or you heard a little bit of detail on a certain case, and you were trying to find as much out as you could out about the case. And sometimes people wouldn't talk to you, sometimes they would, but that's pretty much the way it worked, right? You guys just called in for information.
Yeah. Basically, they were called cop checks, and we had to do them pretty much every hour or so. Eventually, I started spending a lot more time out in the field, and I was able, because we had scanners. When I heard a call go out, I could go to the scene, and that's how I was able to meet a lot of investigators, because I would actually try to go out to the scene and see what they were doing. And even if I wasn't going to write about it, I hate to say this, but back in those days in Miami, they had a thing they called nothing homicides, which was basically just a run-of-the-mill killing that didn't involve 20 people or a wild shootout on the street or a car chase. And the media was just so inundated with murder and crime that a lot of these homicides didn't get covered. But I tried to go out and spend time there, because that was when I was able to learn from the detectives what they were doing when they were working these cases that weren't under the intense scrutiny that they faced on a lot of the other cases that they worked.
Yeah. And I think, for a lot of people that aren't familiar with that era, maybe have not lived in South Florida that long. And I think the perception is that nowadays crime is through the roof. And it's not great. Of course, obviously, we'd love to lower the crime rate, but back in the early 1980s, things were chaotic. I mean, it was to the point where our agency, Miami-Dade Homicide, was handling a little more than a homicide a day.
Yeah.
And that, that for a town that used to be considered this idyllic place with palm trees swaying was just a culture shock for everybody. And there was this tsunami of cocaine and money just washing through the community. And it was something that everybody just was, it was not enough people to handle it. In a certain sense, right, for us as homicide detectives, it couldn't have been a better time in terms of getting experience. And for you too, right, for a reporter, what more could you ask for? You never had to search for stories.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of times trying to decide what to cover and what not to cover. And it was interesting, because the more time that I got to spend with different police detectives, the more I got to learn about what they did and how they did it. And, I also was able to, to work on my own investigative skills, because a lot of times I had to do work on cases. I tried to interview witnesses, kind of doing the same things that they were doing, only I didn't have subpoena power. So you had to take a little bit different tack to get people to talk to you. But I learned a lot from watching the guys that I really admired, you, and there were so many others. I couldn't even recall all their names. So many others who were just incredible investigators, patient, smart, and they really knew how to handle people. I was lucky enough to watch a number of their interrogations. They were very kind to me and very open with me. And I saw how they handled people and how they got information from people. And it certainly wasn't what you saw on, television. It wasn't like that
Right.
at all. And that was one of the first things I learned, because of course I had that image in my head, the good cop, bad cop thing. And it just didn't work like that. And I learned a lot from watching you guys, how you spoke to witnesses, how you spoke to especially people that were suspected of different crimes. It was really an eye-opening experience for me.
It's really great that you mentioned how you had to talk to witnesses, because you had no subpoena power, as you said, like we did. So you had to finesse your way into getting information. And I really like to hear that, because on this podcast and previous episodes, I've talked to private investigators about how they have no authority. So they have to use their creative skills. And talking to people, interviewing people is way more art than it is science, as you well know.
Yes, it is. And I think one of the key things I learned from watching several interrogations is how the detectives that were questioning people were, obviously they were genuinely interested in what these people had to say, because it was pertinent to the crime, the case that they were investigating. So what I learned was, if you managed to exude that sort of genuine interest in what people were saying, they would pretty much tell you all kinds of stuff, even including a lot of stuff you didn't want to know.
Yes.
But it's just coming across as someone, I'm genuinely interested. I really do want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your point of view. And I learned that was how you got people to open up. And that served me well during the rest of my reporting and editing career, is if you show a genuine interest, people will reciprocate and talk to you. Even when there were so many times, Ron, where I was like flabbergasted by what people were telling me, because they were incriminating themselves or putting, and you're just like, okay, I'm writing this down. I'm taking notes. You see me taking notes, right? But it was just that, and that was what I learned from watching how you guys did your jobs.
People take for granted what you guys did back in the day. I think there's a lot of focus on the investigators and all that, but you got to see a lot of the same stuff we got to see. And like you said, people would open up to you. You weren't near as much of a threat to be able to lower the legal boom on them like we could. So they would open up to you. What would you say is one of the most impactful stories in that regard that you remember from your early days as a reporter?
Oh my God, there were so many. One of the cases that actually, one of my first big case was a shooting out in the Kendall area of Miami, which at the time was considered sort of a Tony area. I don't think it's considered that so much anymore, but in those days you didn't have a lot of shootings out there, and it was kind of a big deal. And there were a lot of people there, a lot of media, and everybody thought it was a robbery. There's this guy, he's lying by his Mercedes in front of this house, everybody was reporting it as a robbery, and the investigators on the scene weren't saying anything, and they weren't releasing the guy's name, which I thought was a little odd because he was right in front of his own house. They kept saying, well, we're going to notify next of kin, which is, I guess, what they said when they didn't want to tell you who it was. But I ended up poking around a little bit, and I managed to find somebody sort of at the edge of the crowd. And she just looked like, I don't know, like she didn't belong there, but she was really interested. So I started talking to her, and she eventually ended up giving me the name of the guy who had been shot. And it turned out that he was supposed to testify the next day against a city of Miami police detective who had been arrested in a Bolita operation, which is near and dear to your friend David Shanks' heart, and he was going to testify, and somebody ambushed him in his driveway and killed him. And I remember when I told one of the cops who was at the police tape that we all had to stand behind, I said, can you tell the sergeant over there that I know who this guy is? And then it was like, they actually said, okay,
wow,
meet us downtown in 2 hours and let's talk about this. So that was sort of how I got my first big break. And it was just because that girl, I started talking to her, and she ended up being a cousin of this guy, and she was a little standoffish. But I said, look, I'm a reporter. I'm really trying to find out what's going on. And we talked about a bunch of other stuff. And then finally she said, well, there was an article in the paper today, and I think that got him killed. And I'm like, oh, there was. And so what's his name? So she told me his name. And sure enough, they had written an article about him testifying the next day. And she was convinced that that's what got him killed.
You know, that story is proof positive that when you're interviewing somebody, you have to focus on being a listener before you focus on the questions you want to fire at them.
Well, that's very true, Raman, and that's another thing I learned from watching you guys do your thing. Is yes, you have to listen. Too many reporters, and I've seen this time and again, are so busy thinking of their next question, they're paying very little attention to what the person is actually telling them. Either they're recording it or they're just sort of jotting down some notes, but they're not. You have to be really focused on what the person is saying. And by doing that, I was able to take this conversation where I wanted it to go and get this gentleman's name. But that happened. That just kept happening. There were so many cases where I felt like I was just very lucky to get the information. But looking back on it, I realized that a lot of it had to do with my desire to actually hear what they wanted to say and to listen to them and to build my questions on what they were saying as opposed to the end result that I wanted to get to.
Yeah, that was absolute skill on your part. And, you know, you and I met back in 1986, I believe. Do you remember the case? How do you remember it?
I remember that you actually called me. Somebody put us together. Another detective that I had known said, "Oh, he's working on this case and he needs some help." And what you needed was a description of try to identify a body that you had found in the Everglades that didn't have a head. And I mean, I was like shocked, but I'm writing all this down and you gave me all the information and we ended up putting it in the paper. I don't think it generated any leads for you, but we ended up talking for a little while. And I thought, well, this guy is really cool. So I definitely want to keep talking to him. And then, you know, there's sort of the rest just sort of happened from there. But it turned out that was the Harry Rivenbark case. And I don't know if we should go into that here, but
I mean, we can touch on it a little bit. You know, that the body was found way out off the Aerojet Canal, which is in extreme southwest Dade County, like on your way to the Keys. And nearby, about, if I remember, about 300 yards south of where the body was a wrecked Piper Navajo airplane. And at the time that you and I spoke, Jon, I never knew that you were a pilot and were into airplanes and flying. So it was kind of this whole serendipitous thing, right, where we ended up having conversations about plane and you know,
yes,
and Miami Airport and all these things that ended up becoming relevant to the case.
Yeah, because I ended up being really fascinated with like, well, what were they doing out there? And you were explaining to me how they set up these like military style landing strips to bring in. I guess these guys were smuggling weed, but it was happening all over South Florida. And I was actually a pilot based at Miami Airport, which was out on the edge of the Everglades in those days. And so yeah, all that was fascinating to me. And it ended up being a fascinating case, especially since it ended up being someone you actually knew.
Yeah, that really was a crazy case. And it took a couple of weeks before we identified the body. And it was a guy that I knew pretty well in high school and spent a lot of time with. And so there was a whole different dimension to that thing. But like I said, I think we might even do an episode just on that case alone. It's a good story to tell. But
yeah, it's a great story.
Do you still fly?
Yes, I do.
Yep.
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's my therapy. So yes, I still enjoy it.
And you have an incredible story to tell. We won't get into the details about your dad, who was a pilot in the military. And I mean, you had to do your own investigation on what happened to him, didn't you?
What I investigated was he died when I was very, very young. But he was a fighter pilot in the Southwest Pacific, and he was an ace and pretty well known pilot for the realm that he was in that particular theater. The research that I did was I actually took a trip to where he was based in New Guinea in 2018, and I knew really nothing about what his war life was like. So I did a lot of research and had the help of a friend, and was able to actually find where he lived when he was there in New Guinea. It's like near a village, and the village is still there. And there's several people who actually remembered when the Americans lived there, and they showed me where the camps were. It was a pretty amazing experience, especially since it's been 75, 80 years, to see the place where my father actually fought and flew and lived with all these other guys. You want to talk about the greatest generation. That was the group right there, in my humble opinion, anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. I hope we're going to see some sort of book or documentary or something coming out of that, right?
I don't know. There were some articles written about it, and there was an NPR story about it, and I think right now I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about what it was like in the 80s, being a new reporter and doing those cop checks, calling into the police department and trying to find information. How have things changed for reporters today? Like, how are they making contact with investigators?
Well, what I've seen, my last stint in the media was about 2 or 3 years ago. Everything is web-based now, and the police investigators don't really have the same relationships with reporters anymore, because back when I was doing it, we needed each other. We were the outlet for to the public, and we kind of needed to work together. These days, there's Twitter. If the police want to reach people, they have much, much more effective ways of doing it than going through a reporter. So that has changed a great deal. And reporters, too, have so many more digital tools that they can use to do investigations. The first thing when something happens is they jump on and they find Facebook pages or Instagram pages or Twitter, and they can find out pretty much anything about somebody. That's because people are so willing to put themselves out online that it makes it's an entirely different skill set that the younger reporters are using today. And I know the police do it too,
Right. Yeah. Back then we would get these calls, and of course, we're swamped with cases and trying to plan our day and which witness we're going to interview. And we would get these calls, and sometimes they were annoying as hell, right? And some of the reporters could be just a real nuisance. One of the things that, and I'm going to blow your horn here a little bit, and because you did set yourself apart, Jon, and what happened was you were the only reporter that I remember that would ever write a story after interviewing me and say, look, I'm going to write this up and send it to you before I send it to my editor. If there's anything you don't want in there, let me know and I'll take it out. And you held yourself to that standard, and that's what won you over with us, for sure. And we always knew you were a guy we could trust. And I think that's an important lesson for anybody listening that is doing investigations or reporting or journalism. You have to mean what you say and follow through with it.
Well, thanks for that. And had anybody, my editors, ever known that I was doing that with you guys, I probably would have been taken out to the woodshed, because that was just not something you did. But I realized early on that I was too inexperienced, and that I wanted to. My main goal for doing that was to get things right and to make sure that I had it correct. But I also realized that I could do a lot of damage just throwing around information that I picked up, especially stuff that didn't have any context. So that was another reason I did that. I wanted to make sure that that nothing in any article that I was responsible for was going to end up damaging a case against someone who committed a homicide later on. That was very, very important to me. And I was totally comfortable with it, even though it was frowned upon as a practice. I didn't care. It was more important to me to get things right, and also to make sure that I looked out for the people who were helping me, which was you guys. I didn't, because I've seen, and I know you've been through this. Something gets out in the media and there is hell to pay. from the command staff, and I did not ever want to be responsible for that. And it worked out well. I knew when I filed my stories that they were as accurate as I could make them, that there weren't going to be any rude surprises for somebody who went out of their way to be kind to me and help me, give me information when you guys really didn't have to do any of that stuff. You could put out a 2-line press release and that was all you needed to do. So I took all that into consideration, and plus I was actually developing really good personal relationships with a lot of the people that I was working alongside.
Well, that's it. Private investigators listening to this, take heed. Much like a reporter, your reputation is all you have, and the moment that you breach someone's trust, you're done.
Yes, yeah, and that's one thing I learned early on, because I saw it happen to other people. You guys have some long memories, and you remembered when people didn't treat you right. And I never wanted to be on that side of the coin. I always felt good when I was with an investigator or a police officer, and they were introduced me to someone else, and they would say, and this is like Miami-Dade cop talk, they'd say, "He's QRU." That made me feel really good because that told the other officer that this guy was okay. You could say things in front of him. I never wanted to jam anybody up. That was never my goal.
Yeah, for the uninitiated, right? QRU was the radio code for okay. That meant like everything's okay here. So if you describe somebody as QRU, that means that's a guy that you can, go to happy hour with and have a drink and not worry about what you're talking about. Right? And Jon, what advice would you give to people that are getting into journalism, or for that matter, getting into private investigation? What would be like the paradigm for someone who is going out there to try and get information from people? What are the most important things to remember?
Well, we've talked about it. The number one thing is to convey a genuine interest in the people that you're talking to. That is the most important thing. Obviously, listening. Listen to everything they say. Listen to how they say it. Watch their body language. These are all very simple ways to pick up on how people are really feeling, no matter what's coming out of their mouth. But you have to listen first, and then take all those other things into consideration. And like I said, I learned from watching trained interrogators, trained investigators questioning people. And I think if you can get access, there's plenty of access to that these days. There was no 48 hours or cops or anything like that back in those days.
Right,
but there's so many ways that people can learn these techniques, and just watch how things are being done by people who do this as a profession, and when the stakes are really, really high. And that would be my advice.
Yeah, and that's great advice. Jon, you've been through a lot. What are you working on now? What are we looking forward to seeing coming out of Jon O'Neill's vast and dynamic brain?
Not much. I'm pretty happy. I do a lot of I do freelance writing work, and I'm very content. I've been through a lot. I moved back to Florida 4 years ago after my last stint in as a producer in Los Angeles. And I'm open to anything, but I'm not planning on anything. I'm very, very, very content with what I'm doing now. I get to help people with the kind of marketing writing that I'm doing. So as long as I'm being of some service to the world, I'm pretty okay with what I'm doing. And I'm also flying under the radar, which I'm enjoying very much.
Literally. Yeah. Okay. Well, it would be remiss of us to not mention the documentary you did called Pieces, which is about the 1996 crash of ValueJet Flight 592 in the Everglades right after takeoff from Miami International Airport. It was really quite a shocking event here in South Florida, and a really big undertaking for our police department. We were all out there in the swamp picking up pieces of the plane, pieces of the people. And you did a terrific job on the documentary. Can you just talk about how you started that and how you put that together?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It actually did pretty well. It won a couple of awards. It was in a film festival that was that one of the curators was Martin Scorsese, and we got a lot of really good feedback from it. But basically, I just I'm as a pilot, I'm interested in air accident investigation and why planes crash and all that sort of stuff. But knowing you and Greg Smith, R.I.P. Greg, and Oscar Roque, who was part of the police diving team, were out there, I started thinking about what was that like for you? And that became the premise of Pieces, was to tell the story of three people whose job it was to go face this horrific situation and how you dealt with it and what the effects of that were. And it's something that I'm still actually quite proud of.
Oh, you should be, because I think it was a tremendous production. I was honored to be a part of it. I know Greg was too. Greg Smith was my partner for many years, and Oscar as well. We still talk about it when I see Oscar. So how do people get to look at that? Is that accessible to the public somewhere?
Well, it isn't, but I have my production partner, my friend Steve Peterson. I have to get with him and figure out if we can post it online. I mean, I have a couple DVDs of it and the master tape of it, but this was in 2001, so there was no YouTube. So maybe I need to try to figure out a way to get it out there so people can see it, and maybe that's going to be the next thing that I do.
There you go. So I mean, you get yourself a YouTube channel. That's not too hard.
Well, yeah,
I'll put it on mine. I've got a YouTube channel. I'd be proud to put it up there.
Well, I might just do that. I actually, my niece, who's an engineer at Boeing, was the last person I showed it to. She wanted to see it. She had never seen it, so we watched it. This was a couple of months ago, and I was actually like, wow, I was really proud of, because it was the first real documentary that I had ever worked on, and I not only helped conceive of it, but I also edited it. Most of it, and it turned out to be everything that I wanted it to be, and really it was a tribute. It was kind of it was supposed to be a tribute to you and Greg and Oscar and all the other people who were out there in the swamp, in the heat and the rain, dealing with the after effects of that horrible crash.
And it really came across that way. And in fact, I don't know whether you intended it this way, but it was a tribute to the victims and their families too. All 111 of them. Yes. And that was one of the reasons that we wanted to film. I think we filmed one of your interviews at the actual memorial that's out there. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to do that, because so many people did lose their lives. And, you never want to forget that either. Right. When I showed that, first time I showed that to my students when I was teaching high school a few years ago, showed it to my criminal justice students. The first thing they did when they saw me is they started laughing uproariously at this purple shirt that I was wearing. And I had to like, hey guys, can you focus on what's being said here? And they were just, Mr. Nyberg, look at you, you're hilarious, But
I thought that purple. I think Steve may have told you to wear a color like that.
Possibly,
I don't recall. Because my friend Steve was the director and one of the main shooters on the project, and I think he may have told you to wear that shirt. I thought you looked great though.
No, it was really a great thing to be a part of that, and it is a terrific production. So I hope you get it out to the public at some point. That would be a good thing. But thank you. I want to close here by just, for number one, thank you for taking the time to come on and explain. You hit so many great points that will resonate with private investigators, because the skills are very common, right, between journalism and private investigation. And I think that you did a great job of doing that. And, the things that you talked about, trust and interviewing witnesses, that's what makes you QRU. But you're QRU, man. Did I ever tell you
that? I appreciate that. And just, in one final thought is that people want to talk about themselves. People want to talk about the work that they do and the experiences they have. So I always tried to create an atmosphere where they felt safe telling their stories. And that's, again, another technique that I learned from watching professionals do it. And if you create that space, people will just go off.
So true.
I've seen it happen literally hundreds of times. So it's creating that space where people feel empowered to talk about themselves and to tell, this is what I do, this is how I feel. I think that could help, especially a private investigator.
So true. I mean, you have to not only open the door for them, but sometimes you have to kind of put your hand on their back and help them through it. So,
yes,
and that's a delicate thing sometimes, but you did it well. And Jon, once again, thanks a million for spending the time to go over this and over your career and all these techniques you use to be a great journalist, man. I really appreciate that.
Well, I've enjoyed being here. I always enjoy talking with you, and I think let's talk about Harry one of these days.
Yeah, we should. We definitely need to get together and catch up, and maybe do something about that story too. All right, Jon, you take care. We'll talk again real soon. Okay.
Look forward to it, Ram. Thanks for everything.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jon O'Neill, what a man of tremendous talent and insight and generosity to spend his time here sharing his experiences and observations and his skills with you. I guess you may not have ever expected for a reporter, a journalist, to be on this show, but I hope you learned how similar journalism is with investigation. They kind of go hand in hand. So thanks again for being here. I'm always looking forward to your feedback. truth@nybergpi.com is my email. On Twitter @nybergpi. I want to find out who you are, what you're looking forward to in coming episodes, and what you value the most. That's what this podcast is about, providing useful, valuable content that can make you a better investigator. Thanks again for being here. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode in a week or less. In the meantime, remember, always put your best foot forward and don't forget to work on your other foot. Take care, everybody.